Thank you for coming this evening. Please be turning to the 56th Psalm this evening, please, Psalm 56, as we continue our study of the Psalms. We're still in a section that Psalms were written by David, and in the last several that we've studied, David has been discussing various problems that are created by people that do not serve God faithfully. Last time we studied the 53rd Psalm. We talked about the person who does not believe in God but mistreats the people of God, and how foolish that person would be, and what the consequences would be, and the fear and so forth. The 54th Psalm, he was talking about how was based on the fact that he'd been mistreated by the people of Ziph, who had tried to turn him over to Saul, that Saul would capture him. But he was trusting in God to protect him. And then the 55th Psalm, we're talking about how he was betrayed by a friend. And while we don't know specifically the case in there were several times in his life that could have applied, but it certainly would have been an example of Jesus being betrayed by Judas. Tonight we're going to be within the 56th and 7th and 8th Psalm. Questions, comments before we start with the 56th Psalm tonight? Anybody? Okay, let's go ahead and read the Psalm. If you'd like to read Psalm 56 for us, please, before we begin. Psalm 56, if you'd like to read for us, please. Bill, would you read that for us, please?
Be merciful to me, O God, for man would swallow me up, fighting all day. He oppresses me. My enemies would hound me all day, for there are many who fight against me, O Most High. Whenever I'm afraid, I will trust you. In God I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear. What can flesh do to me? All day they twist my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They gather together. They hide their marks my steps. When they lie in wait for me, my life, shall they escape my iniquity? In anger cast down the peoples, O God, my wanderings. Put my tears into your bottle. Are they not in your book? When I cry out to you, my enemies will turn back. This I know because God is for me. In God I will praise his words. In the Lord I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Vows made to you are binding upon me, O God. I will render praises to you. For you have delivered my soul from death. Have you not kept my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living?
Okay. So as we look at the questions on Psalm 56, question number 8, again, this is discussing a particular situation. So the question is, what was the situation that he's describing? First couple of verses talk about it, but the heading tells us specifically what it was. What was the problem that he was facing as it led him to write this psalm? Frank?
Philistines had been hounding after him, chasing after him, and captured him in Gath.
Okay. So the heading says that he was captured by the Philistines in Gath. So look at the map here. Here we have the Dead Sea. You have Jerusalem. See, Gath is just pretty much west and a little bit south from Jerusalem in the territory of the Philistines over by the Mediterranean Sea. Gath also, you may remember, was the place that Goliath was from. But so he was captured or have a problem with the Philistines. Where is this recorded in the Old Testament, and what additional information might we get from the Old Testament about this? What does the Old Testament say about it? Rick?
Psalms 118 and 6 says, God is on my side, and I will fear not what man can do to me.
Okay, so we have the same concept described in several places, actually. We'll talk about as we go through the discussion. But the specific case of the Philistines who had captured him, I remember where that was. Where's that found? Susie?
I'm checking my reference. I think it's 1 Samuel 21:11.
Yes. Yeah, 1 Samuel 21, verses 10 through 15. The story tells how David was attempting to flee from Saul, so he went to the territory of the Philistines, thinking he might be safe from Saul there, but he wasn't safe from the Philistines. And there were some Philistines who remembered that the people of Israel had praised David so highly for his victories over their enemies, and so David actually pretended to be insane so that he would escape. So that's the situation that's described here in this psalm as it talks about the problems that he's facing. Okay? Any other comments on the first couple of verses? Well, actually, the first 3 or 4 verses even. That he describes his situation. Any other comments on how he described his situation in those first 4 verses? All right, so Rick has mentioned specifically the last part of verse 4. In God I put my trust, I will not fear. What can flesh do to me? And he referred us to Psalm 118. What other passages express that idea that if God is on our side or we're on his side, we don't need to fear what men can do for us, to us? Other passages that are similar to that? Terry?
Hebrews 13:6.
I'll read that, please. Or you have that?
No, I didn't have it.
Okay.
But I can't remember which one it is. Here it is.
The Lord is my helper. I will not fear what man can do to me.
Okay. All right. And there are others. The 27th Psalm we've already studied, which is similar. And there's a number of others. In Luke 12, verses 4 and 5, for example, Jesus has said that we should not worry about people who all they can do is kill us. We should be more concerned about God, who can not only punish us with death, but with eternity in hell. So David is expressing here then that he should not be that concerned about what people can do. Questions, discussion, thoughts about that? What can we learn from that? What are our lessons from that, Karen?
Well, it doesn't mean that we won't ever be afraid. Just the previous chapter, Psalm 55, verses 4 and 5, David said, my heart is severely pained within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me. So he expresses great fear there. I think what he's saying here and later on in the chapter is that when you trust in God, it helps you overcome that fear. When you put your trust in him and you continually think about him. But it doesn't mean you won't ever be afraid.
Okay. Other comments? Terry?
The kind of deliverance that God gives is not always the kind man expects. And sometimes his deliverance is death.
Okay. And I think those are important points. A lot of times I've read verses like this and say, okay, then it's actually wrong to be afraid when you're facing danger, but that isn't the point. And as Karen pointed out, and even right here in verse 3, David says, whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. He's not denying that there are times when we have fear. We feel that natural reaction of fear when we face danger. That isn't wrong. The point is, we need the courage to do right, regardless of what causes the danger. And that courage, that strength comes from God when we trust him to care for us. Okay? Other comments on the first 4 verses and the lessons we should learn about what David says about fearing in this time of challenge and difficulty from the Philistines. Any others? Okay, now we're going to see verse 4, the concept of what can flesh do to me. It's going to be repeated again in verse 11 when we get down there. Let's go ahead and look at further. Question number 9. So how were the people treating him? In verses 5 through 7, what does he say about how they were treating him? In verses 5 through 7, what were they doing? Steve?
They constantly misrepresented his words.
Okay, they misrepresented him. They twisted his words. Okay? So I ask you for other Bible examples of that kind of thing, or examples from today. Does that kind of thing happen today where people twist the words of those who are trying to serve God? Bible examples? Terry?
Well, I had Daniel as an example of how people watched him and tried to speak against what he was doing, and finally realized the only way they could trap Daniel was to make it illegal to do what God said.
Okay. All right, so certainly Daniel was one who was mistreated by enemies, trying to use his position and circumstances against him. Other examples in the Bible or today? Steve?
In Matthew 26, 59 through 61. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at the last, 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days."
Okay. So Jesus was often mistreated in this way, wasn't he? They often used his words against him. And one example that comes up repeatedly in Scripture was when he said that if they tore down the temple, meaning his body, that they killed him, he would raise it up in 3 days. But they tried to apply it to the physical temple and claim that he was going to destroy the temple and claim he could build it up in 3 days, the physical temple, when he's talking about his body. So they mistreated, misused, misrepresented his teaching in order to turn people against him. Okay, Susie?
Well, in Daryl's lesson Sunday night from Galatians, Galatians 1, verses 6 and 7, I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is not another, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel.
Okay. So the truth is, the same kind of thing happens today. When we stand for the truth and do what's right, we may as well expect it, no matter how hard we try, people are going to misuse what we say at times to try to discredit us, try to turn people away from the truth that's being taught. And you will experience, if you haven't, you will, if you just keep talking to people about the gospel, eventually it's just a matter of time until you find that happens to you. So they're doing this to David. Many examples, they did it to Jesus, and many other examples in Scriptures where people twist your words because their thoughts against us are for evil. Other comments on verses 5 through 7. Okay. So move on then to verses 8 and 9. What is the request of God then? What does he ask for God to do? Given the problem he's facing, the circumstances, what does he ask of God in verses 8 and 9? Frank.
That God would record his wanderings and his tears of sorrow, and that will, God will turn back the wickedness of his enemies.
Okay. Number my wanderings, put my tears into your bottle. Are they not in your book? Then my enemies will turn back. What's the significance of putting my tears in your bottle? Trevor even mentioned that in his prayer. What's the significance of that expression? Comments? Terry?
Well, it helps us to recognize that our pain is not just our pain. God recognizes when we're having sorrowful times, when tears come to us over loss or misfortune or people turning against us, that God doesn't let that pass without notice.
Okay. Other comments? Okay, so it's similar to the comments to the last part of the verses, and just maybe a different way of saying it, that they're in your book. God has a record of our lives and the things that happen to us. Some passages describe it as written in a book. This one describes it symbolically, of course, as being put in a bottle. That God preserves it. He's aware of it. God knows what's happening in your life and when people mistreat you or other problems in your life. God's not, as some people think, just started the world and then went off and left everything to run by itself and he doesn't pay attention. That's not the case at all. He knows the hairs of our head. He knows everything about us. And he knows our tears. He knows our suffering. And that ought to be a comfort to us that he would then be with us if we serve him faithfully. Other comments on verses 8 and 9. All right, so he concludes the psalm in verses 10 through 13. He makes a commitment. What is his commitment in verses 10 through 13? Steve.
In 10 and 11, his unwavering trust in God. 12 promises to fulfill his vows. 13 is grateful to God for delivering him from death and protecting him from falling.
Okay. All right, so he assures that God, he's going to put his trust in God. He knows God is his source of strength. And he faces difficulties, so there's again the last part of verse 11, I will not be afraid what can man do to me. I put my trust in God. And he will keep his vows to the Lord. Verse 12, vows made to God are binding, and I will render praises to you. What lesson do we learn from the fact that he says vows made to God are binding? Thoughts for us to learn from that? Do we make vows to God? I think we easily think that we don't. Rick?
When we were baptized, we basically made a vow to God to follow after his scriptures and to follow his son, Jesus Christ.
Okay, wasn't that a vow? A sacred promise. We may not have used the word vow, but that's what it was. A sacred promise. When you make a promise to God, God expects you to keep it. Okay? Other examples of promises we make to God? Karen?
Well, those that are married make a vow before God to be faithful.
All right, certainly marriage is a vow before God, isn't it? And we have and yet all around us we see in society people that don't keep that vow. Don't, in many cases, make very little attempt to fulfill the responsibilities that they promised before God that they would keep in their marriage. Other examples? What about the songs? Oh, Susie, go ahead. What about the songs that we sing? The prayers that we pray? Aren't those promises, many of them, made to God? When you make a promise to God, it's a serious matter. When we sing in our songs about how we intend to trust God and we're going to study his word and we're going to help others learn his word and we're going to worship him and we're going to obey him and all those things we continue to sing about in our songs, those are all sacred promises being made to God. And we may not use the word vows, but God holds us accountable to keep those. And so David is saying that he's going to keep the vows he's made to God. And he's confident then that God will trust him, that he will trust God, that God will care for him, and he can walk before God safely in verse 13. Questions, comments through verse 13? Terry.
This is jumping back to the end of verse 9, where it says, this I know, that God is for me. We need to keep that in our hearts and minds, that God isn't working against us. He's working for us. And that should give us courage.
It should, shouldn't it? Again, understanding, though, that we do what we're supposed to do. We have our responsibility to fulfill it. And that's David's point. He'll serve God because he trusts God, and then he knows God will take care of him. Okay? Let's go ahead and move on to the next psalm then. Psalm 57. In many ways, it's similar. Psalm 57. Who'd like to read this 57th Psalm for us, please? Frank, please.
Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me. For my soul trusts in you, and in the shadow of your wings I will make my refuge until these calamities have passed by. I will cry out to God Most High, to God who performs all things for me. He shall send from heaven and save me. He approaches the one who would swallow me up, Selah. God shall send forth his mercy and his truth. My soul is among lions. I lie among the sons of men who are set on fire, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue a sharp sword. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be above all the earth. They have prepared a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They have dug a pit before me. Into the midst of it, they themselves have fallen. Selah. My heart is steadfast, O God. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and give praise. Awake, my glory. Awake, lute and harp. I will awaken the dawn. I will praise you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing to you among the nations. For my mercy, for your mercy reaches unto the heavens, and your truth unto the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be above all the earth.
Okay. So again, it would help us to think of the background behind this psalm. We look in question number 1. David makes a request, but again, the request is based on a particular background. What's the situation that leads David to make his request in this psalm? Rick.
This is when he fled into the cave away from Saul.
Okay. So if Psalm 1 Samuel 21 was where he was fleeing from Saul and he went to the Philistines, which got him in trouble. He left, escaped from the Philistines, and he fled and hid in a cave. And 1 Samuel 22. Okay. So apparently this is what it refers to, although there was a later time when he also was hidden in a cave. But it's still being pursued by Saul, and he's hiding in a cave for safety. So that's the situation as he describes here. How does he describe how he feels about it and what request is he making in the first 3 verses there? What's his request to God in those first 3 verses? Velma.
That God would be merciful to him and save him.
All right. Again, he's crying out to God, wants God's mercy. He would trust in the shadow of God's wings, like a baby bird being protected by a mother bird, till the calamities have passed by. And God will save him, verse 3, and the one who reproaches him will not be able to swallow him up. Or God reproaches the one who's trying to swallow him up. Okay? Questions or discussion through the first 3 verses? All right, so he describes it then beginning in verse 4. What does he say about it in verses 4 through 6? How does he describe the problem as he feels about it in verses 4 through 6? Susie.
He describes feeling as though his soul is among lions, and that he's among the sons of men who are set on fire or eager anyway to destroy him, whose teeth are spears and arrows. Their tongues are like sharp swords, and they've prepared a net for my steps, but they've fallen into their own pit.
Okay. So again, he doesn't mention Saul by name, but in symbolic language, he describes him as though he's surrounded by lions with sharp teeth, and he compares them to the teeth of spears and arrows, sharp sword. And they're attempting then to capture him with a net, again, symbolically, or they're digging a pit for him to fall into, but instead he's convinced they're the ones who are going to suffer. They're the ones who are going to, in essence, fall into the pit. And we've seen that kind of language before, haven't we? Where David has asked God to not only to protect him, but to cause those who are causing problems for him, let them be the ones who end up having the problems, the difficulties. Okay? Other comments through verse 6. Terry?
The idea in verse 4 about it's not only spears and arrows that are being used against him, but their tongues are sharp swords. They're speaking against David. They're lying perhaps about David and creating issues for David in the minds of the people.
Okay, did Saul ever make false statements about David? Sure did, didn't he? Accused him of making a conspiracy and leading others astray against him. And a lot of things he said wrong about David when David was simply trying to be a faithful servant. Yet Saul accused him of all kinds of evil against him. And so that's the kind of thing that David is facing. And he's hoping that instead he will be delivered. Okay? Other comments in verse 6. Susie.
I'm having a brain freeze. Go to Terry first.
Well, we have a saying that we're taught as children, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me, and that's not true at all.
No. Sometimes the words that people speak are far more painful than physical pain. Okay? Susie.
I take comfort in the phrase he said that I find refuge in the shadow of your wings until the calamities pass by. This helps me realize that the struggles that we go through, the majority of the time are temporary, and that we just need to wait on the Lord and wait for His timing and His deliverance, and that they will pass, and we can get through this.
And we've made that point a number of times in the Psalms, haven't we? That we need to wait on the Lord. But it's so hard to do that sometimes. When we're in the situation, when we face the hardship, the opposition, the mistreatment, the pain, the suffering, at the time it just seems like it's taking forever. But it'll be over. Sooner or later, some way or other, it'll end. But what's important is, when this life is over, what will be our eternal destiny? What will be our relationship with God? And we need to remember that. That's hard to remember, but we need to remember it. Okay? Anything else through verse 6? Okay, it concludes the Psalm verses 7 through 11. And question number 3, again, he's making a commitment. Notice how he concludes his Psalms with commitments. What he's willing to do for God, knowing that he needs God's blessing. What is his commitment to God, verses 7 through 11? Bill.
His heart's going to be steadfast, and he's going to sing and give praise.
Okay. My heart is steadfast. No matter how he suffers. Again and again, David makes that commitment. I know it's tough. I know I need your help, Lord, but I will be faithful. I will continue to be devoted to you. I will continue to praise you. I will serve you. I will not let these problems lead me away from you. And that is such a fundamental concept. It's easy to read that and say, oh yeah, sure. But the truth is, that's what the devil's hoping that he can accomplish, is to lead us astray. That's what he's trying to do with Job. Give him enough problems, and he'll turn away from God. He'll fail to do what God wants him to do. And that's what what the devil is trying to do with you and me when he brings problems into our lives, that we'll fall away. Our commitment must be, we know what's important. If we serve God, we can endure. Okay, other comments on 7 through 11. Terry.
Well, David uses that phrase about God so much through the Psalms, and praises God for He is steadfast, and His love is steadfast for us. And so it's only right that we return
Yes, right. God's promises are sure. We know his promises are sure. The only thing that is in doubt is our response, how we're going to serve him. Okay? Let's go ahead and read the 58th Psalm then. We'd like to read Psalm 58 for us, please. Neil, please.
Do you indeed speak righteousness, you silent ones? Do you judge uprightly, you sons of men? No, in heart you work wickedness. You weigh out the violence of your hand in the earth. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they are born, speaking lies. Their poison is like the poison of a serpent. They are like the deaf cobra that stops its ears, which will not heed the voice of charmers, charming ever so skillfully. Break their teeth in their mouth, O God. Break out their fangs of their young lions, O Lord. Let them flow away as waters which run continually when he bends his bow. Let his arrows be as if it is cut in pieces. Let them be like a snail which melts away as it goes, like a stillborn child and a woman, that they may not see the sun. Before your pots can feel the burning thorns, he shall take them away as with the whirlwind, as in his living and burning wrath. The righteous shall rejoice when he sees their vengeance. He shall wash his feet in the blood of the wicked, so that men will say, surely there is a reward for the righteous. Surely he is God who judges in the earth.
Okay. So question number 4, first 5 verses. How does David describe, again, he's talking about wicked people, mistreating good people. How does he describe the wicked people in those first 5 verses? What does he say about the wicked people? Tell me something he says about them in those first 5 verses. Steve.
1 and 2, corruption and injustice. 3, sinful from birth. 4, they are compared to venomous snakes.
Okay, so that's where I got the idea from my illustration. Like a snake that can't even be charmed. Okay? They work wickedness. Verse in the notice it comes from the heart. Verse 2. Wickedness from the heart. Violence in their hands. Like the poison of a serpent. Verses 4 and 5. Okay, other comments on how he describes the wicked? We need to spend some time on question number 5. Verse 3 says they go astray as soon as they're born, estranged from the womb. Back in Psalm 51, he talked about how that David said he was born in sin and in iniquity his mother conceived him. Here again we have another verse, verse 3, that's used frequently by Calvinists to try to prove totally inherited depravity. He says they're estranged from the womb. You see, so from the time we're born, we're wicked. They say, so here this proves it. So we inherited sin from Adam, and so we're wicked from the time we're born. And so what are your comments? Question number 3. We've all discussed this, didn't we, in 51. Other comments?
It doesn't say anything about Adam's sin.
Where's Adam in the verse? Where's Adam's sin? Where are people inheriting guilt? None of that's in the verse. Not a bit of that's there. They just put the concept, and they think then this supports it. Okay? Other comments? Steve?
It describes the observable behavior of young going astray and telling lies.
Okay. Notice he says they go astray. How can you go astray if you're already totally depraved? If you're totally depraved and you go astray, where do you go? Okay, you can't possibly go astray if you're totally depraved to begin with, but these were astray, and they are estranged. So he's not saying that they are born evil, but they go astray. And it begins early, especially if you're born in an environment that encourages wickedness and sinfulness. That's what he's describing, that they're so wicked that it's characterized their whole life. Okay? Other comments on verse 3? Come on.
Sin itself is committed, it's not inherited.
Right, and you see that in this passage, don't you? He doesn't say they inherited it, they go astray. It's what they do. They speak lies. That's what's make them sinful, is they're speaking lies. Okay? Okay, other comments to verse 5. Okay, and so then verses 6 through 9, consequences, what's going to come upon them. Number of symbols. And again, we see it, this is symbolic language, a lot of symbols. What symbols does he use to describe what's going to happen to them as a result? Verses 6 through 9. Karen.
To break their teeth and break their fangs.
All right. Like lions with broken teeth. Okay. What else? Frank.
There's their lies and their the effectiveness of their oppression is dissolved.
Okay. So the effect is going to be defeated. I thought it was interesting, like a snail that melts away as it goes. You think a little snail sliding along, and all that's left is a little slime. That's what these guys are going to be like. Nothing left but a little slime. Okay? Other illustrations or other comments on verses 6 through 9? There.
Verse 7 says, let them flow away as waters which run continually.
Okay. Just like water running away. If you, it's going to runs, it's gone. And that's verse 8. They're like a stillborn child that doesn't see the sun. All these are just illustrations to show that they may think they're going to be victorious. And we see that all around us. People in sin think that they're right. They've got science on their side, and they got the evidence. They're the ones that are intelligent, and we're the Christians are the losers. But what he's showing here is all these illustrations is in the end, the wicked people are the ones who are going to be the losers. Okay? Other comments to verse 9. Susie.
Verse 9 seems to point to the suddenness and the thoroughness of God's wrath, that it'll come upon them quickly before their pots can even feel the burning sticks, that they'll be taken away like a whirlwind with God's wrath.
Okay, the burning before the fire even seems to get through it. Even so, they're going to be taken away like a whirlwind. And it's burning wrath. So they're going to be defeated. God is not going to tolerate people who continue in sin. Okay, sooner or later, doesn't necessarily mean in this life, but sooner or later, the consequences are going to be there. So what a commitment do the righteous make then? As we conclude the psalm again with a commitment in verses 10 and 11, what's the response of the righteous people? What should the good people do? Verses 10 and 11. Rick.
They rejoice, and so that men will say, surely there is a reward for the righteous.
Okay.
Surely he is God who judges in the earth.
All right. Confidence. Confidence. We can say, surely there's a reward for the righteous. Surely he is a God who judges on the earth. Yes, we won't necessarily see it during this life. We must be confident. It is sure. There will be reward for the righteous. There will be judgment on those who are wicked. We can have confidence. Don't think we're the losers. Don't think like a loser, because we're the ones who serve God. We're on God's side. No one can defeat us in the end. Okay? Other comments on Psalm 58? Susie.
Can you comment on in chapter 57, verse 7, awake my glory.
Back to Psalm 57.
Verse 7.
Verse 7. Okay, verse 8 actually it is, right? Awake my glory. Okay, comments on verse 8, awake my glory. Okay, the rest of the verse says, awake lute and harp, I will awaken the dawn. What I took it to mean was from the beginning of the day, he's glorifying God, praising God from the time of the dawn. When he first gets up in the morning, with the time of the dawn, he's glorifying God, he's praising God with and giving him honor. That's what I took it to mean. Other comments? Thoughts on verse 8? Okay, anything else before we close? Okay, thank you. Chapter 9, Psalm 9, 59 then next time. Thank you.